In progress.
All right, good evening. This is the Lunenburg Finance Committee Thursday, August 18th, 2022 meeting taking place at the Bylaw meeting room and as well across Zoom and on Facebook Live, I believe. In accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast over the Lunenburg Public Access channel and on Facebook Live and on the public Facebook access page. The following information for members of the public that would like to participate in the meeting remotely. To participate remotely from a computer, please use the link below to join the public meeting webinar. Or from a telephone, please dial toll-free 888-475-4499 and enter the web ID number 792-737-0353. This agenda lists all of the topics which may be discussed at the meeting and are those reasonably anticipated by the chair. Votes may be taken as a result of these discussions. Not all items listed may in fact be discussed, and other items not listed may be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by open meeting law. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any announcements from the board? Seeing none. Any announcements from the public? All right, seeing none, moving on to the chair's report. I just have two quick announcements really quickly. For those that don't know, the warrant period or the time period to submit warrants will be starting on the beginning of business on Tuesday, August 23rd, and will close at the close of business on Tuesday, September 20th. Special town meeting has been set for the 15th of November. It's a Tuesday at 7 p.m. And the other portion is more for the board specifically, or the committee specifically. On Tuesday, the Capital Planning Committee and the Select Board met together to discuss ideas for ways to distribute ARPA funds. Peter was there, I attended it as well. I thought it was a good substantive meeting with a lot of good discussion and some good ideas as well. Afterwards, Mr. Jeffries reached out to me and invited us to also hold a joint meeting with the Select Board to do the same thing effectively, or to at least give our recommendations or our thoughts on the process. He threw out the dates of Tuesday, September 20th or Tuesday, October 4th. Personally, I don't lean either direction, so.
Mr. Chairman, is the intent specifically around ARPA, or is it also to discuss fiscal policy?
Strictly ARPA,
Okay.
from my understanding.
I don't think I have a preference on either of those either.
You won't be traveling around the world.
I'm sure I will. So pick one, and that's the date that I'll be traveling.
Anybody else have a preference?
They both work for me.
Okay.
I'm currently available both.
Okay. I'll see if anybody else, if Mr. Baelish has a preference as well, but as far as I'm concerned, the sooner the better. So I'm going to pick the 20th for now, and then we'll see how that works, and if we have to change it, we'll change it at that point.
So, just as a comment related to that, Mr. Chair, because it's not an agenda item specifically, but the fiscal policy was also reviewed at Tuesday's select board meeting. They moved it up on their calendar. It was supposed to be this coming Tuesday. I had hoped that maybe we could include it tonight as a precursor to their next meeting, but because they moved it up on their calendar, it just wasn't feasible for us to lean into that. I don't think that there's a whole lot of controversy in any of the language of the fiscal policy as I've read it, and I would encourage the other members to do so. The big question is, what do we do with those numbers of, 9, 11, and 14% as those borrowing limits given the challenges that we're looking at with respect to building projects. And, to date, we still, in my opinion, have not had a substantive conversation with the town manager, the finance director, or the municipal building committee to really get a sense of how do we want to run those scenarios, if at all, and begin some strategic planning around the fiscal policy. So my opinion is that there's no way that we're going to get to a recommendation inside of a reasonable amount of time that they review the fiscal policy through no fault of our own, because we've been raising this issue for quite some time now. But we're dependent on other functions here to move this along. So, there could easily be a point inside of the next calendar year where those policies need to be reopened and revisited and discussed with the select board. But I don't think that there's a meaningful conversation to be had right now, just because of the lack of progress on those topics.
Okay, I'm fine with that. I'm gonna have to shuffle around anyway as part of the, one of the agenda items we're gonna have to skip over for now anyway, so I'm happy to call an audible for that one, as long as we're allowed to, within scope. It's close, but.
A short meeting is okay, too.
Exactly. And I'll reach out to Mr. Jeffries as well to see if it is strictly ARPA funding or if it does include financial policies as
Okay.
well. But I think there may be a little bit of leeway in the email that he sent out that we could go forward with that one. All right. As we do not have a town manager or a finance director present, I suppose we are not going to be doing those two reports.
Are they definitely not here tonight? Or?
They are both not here tonight.
Okay.
Unless something has changed, but last I had heard they were not going to be making it. There wasn't anything really to bring up anyways, as far as Heather told me.
Well, we have this transfer request that I think requires some context if we're going to vote on it.
So it was handed to me as sort of just a sign it and hand it back, but I've never seen it before, so I wanted to have a little conversation about it and obviously get the committee's opinions on it as well, just to kind of do our job, to check over each of the transfers that are happening in this case. They're small, but it certainly would be nice to have some context. So I'm happy to push this a week as well.
Was there an email that explained the ask?
No, there was an email that came with it, but it wasn't anything specific, just this is supposed to be signed by the select board, the finance committee, and town manager and business manager.
So the obvious question to me when I saw the documents, I think you sent them just earlier today,
Mm-hmm.
right? Was why are we being asked to propose? I believe these are FY22 transfers for a year that's already been closed out and reported to the select board on Tuesday of this week. So I would like somebody to explain the mechanics of this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that the transfers themselves are copacetic. The calendar to me is a bit elusive here. So, and maybe it's a requirement to actually facilitate an official closeout versus a report to the select board. I don't understand.
That's my assumption, is it's just fulfilling the requirement is my assumption, but again, I'm not sure. It's something I think we should definitely need to bring up, at least with Ms. Brochu next week, and with the town manager as well, I suppose.
So the other question is does this have a fuse to it where it needs to get signed?
It does not.
Okay.
No, when I received it, I asked the town manager if she needed me to sign it immediately or if we had time to bring it up and discuss it, and she said there is no absolute time frame with it. So we can certainly punt again on this one until next week. So the next one, this is going to be a very quick meeting. This is wonderful. The next one is the onboarding orientation for new finance committee members. I received a preliminary spreadsheet or PowerPoint presentation actually from Mr. Baelish earlier this week. It's not completed. He's not ready to share it yet. He has another slide to add in on there, and then I think he's ready to present it for next week, ideally. but I would like to at least get through that next week for sure. And at least make some suggestions and get a vote on that one as quickly as possible, because we're bound to have hopefully 2 new people very soon.
Have we received talent inquiries, you know?
No. Not that I've heard of. I checked on Tuesday, and we hadn't had anything yet,
Okay.
at least to my understanding. So, back on Facebook again. Which brings us to Peter, the bylaw proposal.
Okay, thank you. So I've circulated to the members a written proposed new bylaw language, which I'll read for the benefit of people watching at home in a moment. But I want to provide to the members of the board some context in terms of what's transpired since our last meeting, which occurred 3 weeks ago. So at that meeting, which I believe was on July 28th, I read into the record a letter, an email that I had sent to the town manager requesting town council assistance to construct a proposed bylaw for the warrant to deal with amending the capital plan. What transpired after that was that during the communications from other boards agenda item at the select board meeting on the 2nd, Chairman Jeffries basically read that letter, or the substantive portion of that letter, and began a prolonged conversation amongst the members of the select board on the topic, including whether or not town council should be used for this purpose, including the merits of the topic itself, and including, following a question from the town manager, after the select board had unanimously stated its opposition to this topic, whether or not they would entertain putting it on the warrant anyway for consideration for town meeting. I just want to point out to the members of this board, that entire conversation happened under the agenda item communications from other boards. The email that I had sent to Heather the previous Wednesday was not responded to, nor was any other member of this board made aware that that letter would be read or discussed at the select board meeting the following Tuesday. So it was not a communication from this board or any member of this board to the select board. It was a request of the town manager for what is procedurally and by policy within her purview to do. But she explained to the select board and to me the next day that she believed that it was out of scope of what had happened previously, and she wanted to validate with the members of the board that that was their intention for the use of town council. My personal assessment of this, just speaking for myself, was that the discussion as a whole was out of order and surpassed the limitations of open meeting law. It was disrespectful to us to not give us a heads up that the discussion was going to occur, and to give us the opportunity to present a different side of the story during the course of the discussion. The intent of the article, the intent of the topic, the role of the capital planning committee and the process was misrepresented, in my opinion. And the select board prejudiced themselves on the topic, which gives me pause in terms of how this should ultimately be brought forth to town meeting and the process that it should follow. And I called both the town manager and Mr. Jeffries the following morning and expressed my concerns. And I did so the next Tuesday during public comment at the select board meeting on August 9th. So at that meeting on the 2nd, the select board basically expressed their opinions through unofficial means. They didn't take an official vote on it, but then came back on the 9th and officially voted that they would grant the use of town council for these purposes, with the proviso that they wanted the finance committee to first bring forth proposed language for town council to consider. So rather than saying just, can you help us write an article that does this, they wanted us to bring forth proposed language that he could then react to and help us zero in on something that was workable. And again, back to the meeting that we had 3 weeks ago, my intention is not to convince town council or the select board that this is the right thing to do. My mission here is to write an article that doesn't get blown up on town meeting floor because it doesn't make sense or it conflicts with other bylaws or is confusing or ambiguous or whatever. I want it to be tight so that we can have a conversation on the merits. And so that's where we are. So with that proviso, I went to the bylaws. I think that although there are other sections that this proposed amendment or addition could find itself in, but there's a town meeting section of the bylaws, section 81, that is probably the best place to put it. It's a 10-item section, and I basically wrote item 11 on that 10-item section. And so this is what I wrote. Again, the preface here is I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know how to write these things, but to give us something to kind of kick around here, and then hopefully to bring forth to town council as early tomorrow, this is what I wrote. So thanks for bearing with all the background information here. So here's my proposed wording. Section 81-11, amending financial appropriation articles. For capital appropriation articles, comma, town meeting may remove or amend in scope or monetary appropriation any individual project or capital acquisition referred to by or contained in the warrant articles or corresponding motions. Presiding officials shall not permit language in warrant articles or motions intended to limit debate or amendments pertaining to capital appropriations. So I basically wrote this from two angles, right? One is to give town meeting the explicit authority to amend these articles as they see fit, but also to potentially cut off somebody who brings forth a committee or somebody who brings forth an article that is worded in a way that could be interpreted as not allowing for amendments, and then going through the whole warrant process and finding ourselves on town meeting floor in a catch-22 between a specific warrant and the bylaws. So I basically wrote it from both angles. Again, I'm not sure if that's the right approach or a single sentence that just says we can amend capital plans to our heart's content, right? But this is what I came to, and I would appreciate your thoughts and comments.
When I was thinking about it, I thought a one sentence would be fine for it, just direct and to the point on what the intent of it is. The second sentence, I guess, confuses me a little bit because the presiding official, that would be town moderator, right?
Well,
and they're not the ones that actually put it on the warrant.
Which is why I wrote it that way. So my thinking on this is that it's really the select board's responsibility to bring forth the articles and put them on the warrant, and the town manager's responsibility, and it's the town moderator's responsibility to determine if motions are in order or not. So I used presiding officials because I think that it's actually that is a two-step process. Yeah,
so maybe that's where town council may redirect or something on the intent. I'm fine with that. But yeah, I agree with making it simple and to the point, not trying to overcomplicate it. And I have heard, just more background. I did watch capital planning from the 2nd, maybe, August 2nd, I think they had a meeting. I watched it today, and this issue was also brought forward during the meeting. I'm not sure if it was on the the agenda or not, but, you know, I think it was one of the members, you know, said, well, what they're looking to do is line item veto. And I think it's the exact opposite. And I think we forget that legislative committees are the power of the purse, and the executive committees execute the will of the people. And it's not a line item veto in any way. That would be their ability to line out something that town meeting has. So we gotta get back to fundamentals in this town as to what town meeting and the legislative body does versus the executive bodies. So I think there's a sentiment that they put a lot of time and effort and all this other stuff, and I don't doubt that. There's no doubt that they do that. But I don't think that it should be a all or nothing. Here's the thing, and if you want any part of it, you have to approve all of it. We need more ability to affect change in this town.
So I agree with you entirely. I think that this has been grossly misrepresented already by powers that be in this town who are looking to preserve some sense of power that they think that they have. This is not intended to change the process in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
The process doesn't change. The responsibilities of the town manager, of the capital planning committee, of the finance committee, nothing changes. The only thing that this is proposing to do is to clarify that town meeting, who is the body that actually appropriates the funds, has the ability to make changes as they see fit at the end of the process. And it doesn't change anything leading up to that process in any way, shape, or form. And I intend to make that point when the time comes, and I think that it's a fairly clear point once you kind of map it out. But anybody, any select board member can stand up and say, we're looking for a line item veto, and that is absolutely not the case. Executives get line item veto authority. Legislatures do not.
Right. Yeah, and I do think that the town does need that option to adjust budgets. I mean, the whole bus controversy this year is another example, and you as school committee, I'm sure you'll be hearing about this or already have. But I think people need more power into their own government and not less power. So I don't even think this is necessary, because I think the town council's opinion was wrong to begin with. And I think if you gave that to someone that our own attorneys, if we had ones, they would vehemently object to that opinion, citing precedent, et cetera. When a similarly worded article this past year on the 30 School Street did the exact same thing that we're talking about here. They struck down half the article and they approved the other half of it. There's absolutely no difference to it. So I'm in support of this, and for going forward to making it as it should for a bylaw.
So one other comment, and I just want to make the committee aware of this and begin to think about it, is we may ultimately decide in a few weeks, after we've zeroed in on language that makes sense, and at least passes muster with town council, that it would be legally acceptable. We may decide that we do not want to bring this forth through the select board. But any member of this committee or any member of the community could take our work and bring it forth through a citizen's petition.
Is there anything stopping the finance committee from putting a petition forward? I mean,
We do not have the power to put something on the warrant. So we can make a recommendation or an ask to the select board to put it on the warrant, and they have already indicated that they would do so upon our request, even though they disagree with the merits of the article. But as I explained earlier, they've already prejudiced themselves against this without, in my opinion, hearing the whole argument. Now, most of them have been around a long time and kind of understand the ins and outs of what's gone on, and it is kind of what it is. But, you know, what will happen either way is that, you know, the finance committee will hold a public hearing on this. The select board will vote recommendations, And a petitioner can decide whether or not they want to go through that process or not, or just bring it straight to town meeting and skip those discussions. Whereas a board, I think that we have an obligation as a board to thoroughly work through the process to include the discussions with the select board. I'm not going to be around. I will not be a member of this committee when that process takes place. But we're going to have to decide inside of the warrant period which path we deem appropriate, or whether we deem that taking it through the select board is the appropriate path. And I don't have an opinion on that yet, but given what's transpired over the course of the last few weeks, I do think that it's reasonable to consider both paths.
Is there a difference in how many votes you need at special town meeting versus annual town meeting on a bylaw change?
I don't believe so. I need to check, but I think a bylaw change is a majority vote. But I'm not, two-thirds, I'm sorry, yeah. But it's not like a super majority, I don't believe.
There's certain things that at special town meeting have a higher bar than at annual town meeting.
So there is,
Special town meeting, 2/3 vote.
for appropriations. So special town meetings require 2/3 for appropriations and both raise and appropriate. But I don't believe there's any special considerations beyond that.
Yeah. In all that said, again, bylaw or not, I do find that hopefully the process does work out such that there is no controversy when we get there and we don't have to try to line out or change numbers. I think we've shown that we can work as a town to do that, but I do think town meeting should have final say on almost everything financially related. There shouldn't be a small select group of people that give an all or nothing for items that are now significant. I mean, we're talking $2 to $3 million now.
And so a couple other points to that. First of all, we are going to have another banner capital year, right? So we're going to set another record for free cash, and a percentage of that, 70-odd%, is going to roll over into, I believe 70-ish%, will roll over into capital planning plus an appropriation for capital planning. So this will likely rival or be greater than what we've had for the last 2 years for capital planning. And there aren't a ton of items that are rolling forward from previous capital plans, and as we all recognize this past year, there were a lot of first-year items that came up and were approved, and without any kind of long-term public debate or discussion about them. So I think that we're getting to that point where I think that scrutiny is a good thing. And we don't, while the policy says that a certain amount can be put to the capital plan, that policy drives the town manager's actions and the warrant. It does not it shouldn't drive the actions of town meeting, right? Town meeting should be able to do what it sees fit. And if town meeting doesn't think that we should be raising as much money, or thinks that we should be saving more money for a rainy day, or what have you, town meeting should have the ability to do that. So.
I would add that we may want to put some type of language in here that you are not able to amend to surpass the sum of the total allotted capital plan. Because what happens if you amend it to say, instead of spending $500,000 on this project, you say, let's spend $1 million on this project, and you take it away from anywhere else? How does that affect the budget?
Yeah.
And then that opens up the issue.
So I understand your point, Evan. I don't think that would be necessary in the bylaw, at least in terms of the way our current moderator has interpreted these things, or at least in discussions with me, as well as the members of our select board. Their view is when you put something in a warrant as a certain dollar value, the expectation is that that's the dollar value, and it becomes sort of a I don't want to put words in their mouth, this is my language, a not to exceed number, right? So if you were to, if it was $100 and we decided that it should be 101, that's not fair to the voter at home that receives the warrant and says, okay, I'm okay with it being $100 and I'm not going to go to town meeting, but if it's 101, I might want to go and voice my opposition, right? So I'm not sure that given the current folks that we have in place in these roles, that would be allowed, but it might be worth a call to the moderator just to get his take on it. I'd be happy to make that call.
Sure.
And amend it accordingly.
Otherwise, I agree with Chris about, well, I'm curious about the title as well, because you're amending financial appropriation articles, and then you go into the capital specifically. So are you calling out, if anything, I would add this as a subcategory under 81-11, or rename the title into capital appropriation.
So that's a fair point. What I should have called it was capital appropriation articles. And I could easily make that change. Because, as you know, like, the omnibus, for example, there are sections that we can amend and sections that we can't. And that's not something we can affect through bylaws. That's statute at the state level that says we can't touch the school budget, for example, right? So,
Just vote the one number.
right.
And then I would wonder if it makes sense to break out the two sentences into a sub A and a sub B or something like that as well.
All right, yeah, I'll ask town council about that when we bring it to them, but I think that's,
Again, to get rid of the period and put
Yeah.
a semicolon in.
yeah. Okay.
Any other discussion? So what's your end goal for tonight with this? Just to have it discussed, or do you want to have something moving forward? Something official?
I don't think this requires a vote.
Okay, I agree. Do we want to vote to say go to town council?
Yeah, no, I'll take it
It's
to
already
town
been approved.
council tomorrow and keep you apprised.
Put it back on for next week?
Yep.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So under the, I suppose, under the scope of that, it might be a slight stretch, but this may be your spot to talk about fiscal policy as well, to a certain extent.
Financial policy?
Yeah, I don't,
Or at least have a discussion.
so beyond what we discussed, I'm not sure that there's much to discuss,
Okay.
right? Like, no progress has been made on that topic. So, until there's something new to say pertaining to, other than what you talked about, which you brought up in your report under what happened at the select board meeting, they reviewed the fiscal policy. As I've stated, I think everybody here should review the fiscal policy. There's nothing particularly controversial that was noted in that meeting. I think the only salient point that really needs to be discussed, but it can only be discussed with additional context that we don't have, are the borrowing limits. And, we have not made progress in that regard. And,
Now, Peter, is that set by the select board? or-
yes,
Yes. Okay, and that was done a few years ago?
yeah, I want to say it was,
It was revised.
yeah, it's within probably 5 or 6 years.
Finance committee came up with the revisions.
Yeah.
And they sent them, I think, Jay, you were on the board at the time.
Yeah, John
Yeah,
Henshaw.
John Henshaw did the heavy lifting on that.
Because I know my wife was on at the
He-
time.
There was clarifications made, and
I don't know how you get to setting those limits or providing a scenario where you may want to increase the limits, because I think we're talking about increasing, until you take a hard look at what is the next 10 years of our you know, of our spending look like? What are all the capital projects that we envision over the next 10 years? What is all the increases that we project? And again, run through some kind of financial modeling and see whether we think we cross that. Or cross that without scaling back some of the things that we're looking to do as a town. So again, I don't know how anyone would say go from X to Y without having done some kind of analysis like that.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that we really have to go on is, when we ran the numbers nearly a year ago, when we were looking at a $40 million bogey for the rebuild of TC Passios, and we saw that there were 2 out years that exceeded the 11% limit, right? The problem is that does not add additional context. For example, okay, that's a municipal office building, but we also need X dollars for a replacement for Turkey Hill, and we need X dollars for repurposing of this building in Ritter, right? So all the work we did last year was just to raise one, road flag and say, caution, this initial borrowing project is going to exceed our borrowing capacity. But to your point, it didn't take a variety of projects into a totality of a financial picture over the next 10 or 15 years. And that's effectively what, I've asked for as chairman of this committee, of the town manager and of our financial consultants. And, we haven't gotten to a place where we've gotten a response to that. And, in their defense, we also don't have an updated number in terms of a potential cost from the school department. We don't have an updated number in terms of a potential cost from the municipal building committee. You know what I mean? We haven't really sharpened the pen on reuse of this building or Ritter and comparing that against, items in the Vertex report. We know what hasn't been done in the Vertex report, but we don't know that they have to be done, relative to the repurposing of this building. And so, I mean, there's a lot of, if you were to do that analysis today, you would have to make a lot of assumptions that may or may not be valid.
The Municipal Buildings Committee that I'm on now is, there's a lot of people talking, and there's not a lot of agreement, so, about what should be done with different properties. So ultimately, and then we got a comment came in, I was gonna bring this up at the committee reports, but I'll bring it up here, that one of the members said that the school committee really wants to either probably replace Turkey Hill. And main reason was because of the safety of the building, because it was built in the 60s, and, with the Columbine type of things, that it wasn't built for security. And I kind of scratched my head and said, you don't build a new building for that. You could hire Navy SEALs to be there and be cheaper than building a new building. But of course, there's a lot of other things. I know the building needs repairs and all that. So there's a lot of people who want to do a lot of different things, and there's going to be a lot of arguments about, or discussions, I should say, about what should have priority. And I think there has to be, first, okay, let's see what we want as a town, and then look at the current cost of funds and what it's going to cost. And then we run the numbers. And again, I wasn't part of, a number of years ago, the ratios, but I'm a true believer in those numbers being, if they were accurate and good, and are still accurate and good as far as what a a well-run organization should limit themselves to, then maybe, okay, let's take a look, and maybe we can't do all the things we want to do. Or maybe we can do this, or maybe we'll, but I think we have to first figure out where we want to go, as far as what's the top priorities, and then look at the numbers, and then see if it's possible. If we want to build something that costs $100 million, I know we can't afford that.
The problem with that approach, Tom, is that that's exactly what we did a year, that's exactly the scenario that we ran ourselves through a year ago.
Right, but I think you do that before you get to town meeting, or you get close to town meeting. You have to do that with, you can't, right now, there is 40 different, different people have different opinions, and then they're gonna make a recommendation, but who knows what's gonna happen. There's just, I think, a lot of unknowns, and any numbers that you put together are gonna be very difficult to, they're gonna be, garbage in, garbage out. I don't know how, they were saying, well, it's gonna cost $70 million for a new Turkey Hill Middle School, and a little over 50% of it will come from the state. Okay, so then it's about 30 million in debt. Okay, then we can, well, what's the rate? Well, what's the rate gonna be in 2 years when we do this? So there's a lot of that. So it's gonna be, something that's, gonna be difficult to go through. And that's probably, it's difficult to build buildings in a town like Lunenburg or any small town just because of that. That's, it's, and there are people who don't want this building to not be administrative and Ritter, and other people who want to move it out somewhere else. So it's.
So Tom, let me ask you just a practical question. You mentioned that there's lots of different ideas and that there's very little agreement. Do you think that some of those ideas probably exceed our financial capacity?
I don't know. I don't know what, I think the question is all, with anything, it's what you actually spend and when you spend it. Maybe you need, and maybe you can do this, but you can't do it this year. You have to wait 2 more years and then you can do it.
Okay, but there's a totality of stuff that needs to happen probably inside of the next 15 years, 20 years at the most, right? So if you take the $40 million scenario that we looked at last fall, you take the $30 million that it's probably going to cost if we were to rebuild Turkey Hill today or replace it today. You take a few $1 million to rehab this building and the building across the street. Heck, let's look at 30 School Street and Marshall Park while we're at it, right? We got 20 years to play with. You have a background in finance. You know how to do a back-of-the-envelope drill as good as I do. I'm sure a lot better. Do you think we have the financial capacity to do all that?
So you asked a question, if you take the ideas. I think there's ideas that are frugal and can get us well within that. And I think there's exorbitant ideas.
What I'm
and
getting
it's
to
somewhere
is
in the middle.
is
that
we
have
just
to-
stumbled across the chicken and egg problem of planning, right? And
I don't think you have. I think you have to come at this tops down. You got to say, here's the money allocated to all these projects that we can afford over the next 10 or 20 years. That's how you do budgeting. That's how you do any project management.
I agree with you entirely, Chris. What I ran into, with the municipal building committee and what Tom has just articulated is exactly what I ran into with that committee is, I brought forth, let's start a project that says, okay, here are the financial guardrails and we'll operate within these guardrails. And the opposite view is, okay, well, let's figure out what our needs are and then see if it fits within those financial guardrails, which, by the way, is what we did in the past. That's a chicken and egg problem, right? I agree with you, Chris. I say, let's set the financial guardrails, but we don't have the executive intent to do that right now.
As far as the, what do we do and how we build it. One of the questions in my mind was, I remember hearing this when we were talking about the TCP, was that I remember one of the members of the old committee said, well, we asked the superintendent about the after-school program, and superintendent said, well, I really want that to be in a building that's not part of the school because it's better for the kids. Now, I'm going to assume that that is true, because she's a professional and she knows what she's talking about, and I don't. However, it might be that, you know what, it might be best to have, X square foot in a building that we are going to build for that, but it's going to cost us this amount of money, which really cost benefit wise might not be that good. So maybe we need to utilize the schools that we currently have for the after school programs versus building additional square footage somewhere else. Now, I'm not saying that we should do that, but I'm just saying that's a discussion to have, and there's going to be lots of those kinds of discussions. We talked about issues like storage. Do we really need this amount of storage to build? Because it's expensive to build. Do we need a number of all the buildings that we currently have? And if we don't, because buildings are hard to maintain and to you're going to there's annual costs, and then there's capital items, and the more buildings you have, the more it's going to cost. So those are the discussions you have, and then if you can then get to the point where you have enough of those discussions, you can hopefully get to a point where you can say, yes, here are the things that we want to do, here's the timing, here's the estimated costs, and we can afford it, and then let the town meeting to decide, like they should, whether or not this is money they want to spend.
I understand your logic entirely, but as Mr. Jeffries has pointed out, ultimately you need to get the votes.
True.
And there are a lot of different interests here that you've just described.
Right.
That are going to be competing for the same dollars, right? So the arbiter between perfect and good enough is what you can afford, right? And if you don't start with that number, Evan has young kids, right? Are you going to tell Evan that we can't do good space for extended day, but we can do good space for storage, if you can't make a financial argument that one, we've gotten both down to the absolute minimum and it fits within a financial plan? You got to get votes from both sides, right? You got to get votes from town employees, you got to get votes from parents of young families, you got to get folks from, the Council on Aging and their constituency, you got to get folks from people who care about police and safety and fire, and unless you can put together a financial plan that says this is where we started from and this is how we whittled those numbers to fit within those guardrails, you're going to have somebody who said, I don't understand how I got left out. No, I'm a no, right? Or it's just too darn expensive and nobody's going to vote for it as we landed last year, right? And I mean, I just feel like we are well on the path of repeating the failures of the past right now. And I know we've gone way off topic here, but I appreciate your willingness to listen to it.
I don't see how it's an impossible calculation to decide or to figure out if our debt limit is 11%, to come in and say, here's our let's set our capital reserve at a conservative 10%. That way we have some space in case something blows up or something and we need to replace it or something like that. That you can calculate out for the next 30 years what you're spending that you can do each year to sit right at that 10%. As things fall off, as more comes on, to get you a total dollar amount across 30 years that you can then say, okay, we've got $160 million to spend over the next 30 years.
The problem is that it's not a straight line,
No.
right? So you're dealing with big $30 million bogeys that are sitting in the middle of that, right? So that you can look at, I mean, it's in the spreadsheets that we have right now, right? There's debt capacity spelled out in the spreadsheets that we have today. What it doesn't do is, okay, let me throw a $30 million bogey in the middle of that and see what that does to the interest and borrowing capacity once you throw that in the middle, right? So that's really the exercise that needs to take place, is running scenarios where you're dropping major debt in different places on that calendar.
Right, but if that is planned, if you know, okay, our first priority is TCP, or is 30 School Street, or whatever it is, here's our first one. We know what the expense is that will take us up to 10%. There's your limit, there's your cost, there's your drop dead, this is what you have to spend. You now get a committee to get together and say, okay, this is what we can spend, what can we do with that money? Rather than say, hey, do you guys want to have 2 pavilions instead of 3? I mean, it's never going to end up to some concise decision.
But the problem is, and with all due respect, Evan, I think you're oversimplifying a little bit, because that's kind of what we did, right? Like, that crossover point was between the $30 and $40 million proposals that we saw last year, right? $40 million bumped us over the 11% line. The $30 million proposal kept us right at it. But both scenarios did not really give us visibility of a Turkey Hill replacement project inside of reality, right? Once you started looking at debt falling off and reducing those debts and those kinds of things. And that's the heavy work that needs to be done.
But that was based on the good work of the TCP Building Design Committee that came up with, this is our plan, this is what the town has said that they want over various surveys and whatnot. And they said, okay, here's what we've come up with, and here's how much it costs.
Right.
Rather than starting from the other end, as Chris was saying, and saying, okay, here's what we can spend. Okay, I'm sorry, we're gonna have to drop these offices. We can't fit them.
Exactly. And that's exactly where I think we need to be.
So, but that calculation is not an impossible calculation.
Not at all.
Anyone with a spreadsheet can do that.
Not at all.
Maybe a little more than a spreadsheet, but you can, in theory, come up with that idea, and you can get yourself those limits, and then you can let the town decide, okay, we want to spend, we're okay spending 30 million on this project. Make a committee to go and make that work. Rather than just this, I completely empathize with the Municipal Building Design Committee and just the daunting task that they've been given. I think we'll be lucky to get somewhere in the next 5 years before we have the next building start collapsing. But I think if we don't change something, if we don't try from a different approach, we're bound to do exactly what we did the last time and the time before that.
Well, I think having, this committee was set up with somebody from the finance, somebody from the school, so representatives from each of the areas, along with at-large people. I think the purpose was to make sure that we all had a say. And I think, for me, my thing will be, the other committee was pretty much set up to be, this is the wish list, which is fine. But on the other side, this needs to be, they need to come back with not only, these are the things that we want to do and what we suggest, but with the numbers and the financial expectations that we can do it. Yeah. And if they just can't come back and say, well, we want to do this, and oh, by the way, the town can't afford it. Well, it was nice to have all these things, but if you can't afford it, then what's the point? And we might have to make some decisions like they made in the past, where they say, we'd really like air conditioning in this building, but we're not going to do it. Now, okay, that might be okay. I don't know. I don't know. It's like when we're all buying a house or we're buying a car, we all want, the coolest car you can get. But, if you're on a budget, maybe a Toyota Corolla is fine for now. If my son's watching, he should. No, but those are the things that you have to do, and the town, and ultimately the hard part is when you go to town meeting, there are going to be people there, depending on the town meeting, that are there for, I'm there because of the new leash law, and I got a dog, and I want, and we're going to be talking about this, and this is the first they've heard of it. Yeah, people have busy lives and all that stuff, so it's a very hard thing to get through, and they're gonna say, what? You're gonna spend $60 million over the next 10 years on this, and this is the first I've heard of it. It's going, so there's gonna be, it's, when it's a lot of money and it's a lot of things, it's gonna be very hard. So that's why it's hard to build a building in Lunenburg or probably any other small town.
Any other discussion? To be continued.
Much for a quick meeting, yeah.
Almost 8 o'clock. All right, that moves us on to minutes. There's one set of minutes that are in the drive from 7:28.
Yeah, so I sent a note to Evan, you and Amanda. There was one correction in there where she just cut and paste that you kicked off the meeting, Peter, not me. So with that change, I saw nothing else
I move we approve the minutes
with that amendment.
with the amendment, yeah.
Second.
Right. Any discussion? All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Ayes have it. Minutes are approved. Move on to committee reports. So I did change things up a little bit. I stole this completely and directly from the school committee.
So we were just having the discussion last night that school committee's going the other way.
Oh, no, I love it, because otherwise you put people on the spot and you say, you have to
It's
do
really
something.
just to conserve space, but it was kind of a funny moment.
We
last
have
night.
this whole space on the right-hand side. Their meetings last long enough. But I figured this way we could at least make sure that every category or every department gets covered appropriately. So Board of Health, nothing really to report out of there. We met on this past Monday. We were planning to meet with the Parks Department again to go over the use of a special fund that was given to the department, to the board, I want to say in the 80s, possibly the 90s, for septic repair. And this was to be used towards Marshall Park, and just trying to figure out how to make that useful. Otherwise, standard COVID information, nothing really too much different there. Capital planning, I received an email from Mr. Passios just yesterday when he just mentioned the joint meeting with the select board, which I encourage members to take a look at. I thought it was very good. They did have a lot of good discussion as to ideas for where to spend the ARPA money and how to best use it. And it does sound like the select board has a decent amount of desire to put a quote sizable amount or a large chunk for its Marshall Park project. What that number is certainly yet to be determined, but I think that's sort of where they're looking at. But they brought up other ideas as sidewalks near the center of town to help out people with kids with the 1.5 mile walking that they have to do now, and all sorts of other ideas. Council on Aging, we haven't assigned anyone yet, so if anybody would like to volunteer.
Just one thing back on capital planning, like I said, I did watch the meeting from, I think it was the 2nd, and they do seem to have committed to taping those meetings and making them available, so I think message sent, message received, and they're acting on it, so.
Thank you, that's right, yes, I saw that as well.
Yeah, and they had a joint committee with the select board here
Yeah.
Tuesday,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw the first half of it, I didn't see the whole thing. That was interesting.
Any updates on DPW?
No, I reached out to him, but I did not hear back.
Okay. Green Communities?
Other than what we've all heard, that they got funding, which is great, and, yeah,
They signed the purchase and sales, that'd
Yeah.
be great. So we officially own them?
We'll own it September 15th, I believe.
Okay.
There's a closing date, but the PNS has been sealed.
Excellent.
Wasn't there an earmark for that, too? Or a grant?
it was, I can't remember the figure, it was mostly for the lights, but there was also some for something else, I can't remember what it was. A smaller portion for something else, but it was great news.
That is very good news. Land use,
I don't have anything on that, no.
okay. This will skip line.
Municipal building, I did talk about that. We are meeting on Monday, I think it's Monday, get my calendar out here, come on. Monday, the 29th. That's our next meeting. We had a meeting on August 1st, and it was a very short meeting. I think a lot of it was that we hadn't really had a discussion. It was my first meeting, so I announced that I was there. And the next meeting, we're supposed to be giving our opinions on what we should do and how we should do it, based on what the committee had done prior. And I watched as much of the meetings as I could, had some conversations with some of the committee members about, what they heard, and so hopefully at our next meeting after that, I can tell you what went on.
Excellent, thank you. Parks.
Yeah, so Parks also talked about capital plan ideas for input into the capital planning process, and to some extent also related to ARPA funding at the meeting last night. Just a few things. If you're not aware, the beach house is closed right now. There's some substantial structural damage. There was asbestos found, et cetera. So something needs to be done with the beach house. It is already listed in the entry point into the capital plan for this year with no value assigned to it. So we probably need to figure out as a town what to do with that beach house. So that's one of their capital planning ideas.
Hey, Chris, what's the delay in putting a number on that? Like, I mean, it seems like this conversation's been going on for like 8 or 9 months now.
Yeah, it has been maybe not quite that long. It maybe seemed like that. Not 100% sure. I suspect town manager has a number. The question is how to scope. Are they just going to repair it in place? Are they going to look to do something different with it? There's a lot of wasted space in there. There's a lot of inefficiencies associated with it. So I guess scoping the project is probably part of it as well. I think initially town manager thought they could deal with some of the structural issues and get through the season just based on funding that was available in operating, this year. But it's far higher than that. So. The other ideas, obviously Marshall Park, the next step would be engineering associated with it. And I know there's the opportunity to take a phased approach to that. It would be a massive project and we wouldn't want to not have a park for quite some time. So there is some phasing that would go along with that as well. But Marshall Park engineering was a capital plan idea. Kind of across the board, our parks are in a bit of disrepair. And they're really important, as we all know, coming out of COVID, right? So if we look at McNally, the snack bar / announcer booth there is also shut down. There were structural issues there where they deemed it non-usable. They were also talking potentially moving T-ball over there on some land that is shared with the water department. There's actually a bunch more land there, as well as potentially looking at paving some of it for ADA compliance and stuff like that. So there's some ideas around perhaps not a full-blown mega study, but a bit of a concept design portion around how to deal with that in its totality. Short of maybe a master plan, just a bit of a plan on it. And then the final one that they would recommend kind of immediately would be the Northfield Road, the south side of the Saliba property. Surveying that, making sure we understand where all the boundaries are, et cetera. Another thought that's kind of emerged, and maybe we've talked about it even here, is there's interest again on where I forget the name of the company that's looking to get an agreement for tax relief in that.
Walmart.
Yeah, near Walmart. What they did last time they negotiated a deal with that was to try to find some areas to carve out to connect some conservation properties. Potentially, if we did it right, that property actually touches the southern border of that, so whereas maybe there's a way of working with them and even coming in, if we had the surveys in place to get to it from 2A rather than from Northfield, which already has, difficulties. It's a small winding road and in neighborhood, that kind of thing. So perhaps it would be more usable if we could access it from 2A. So first step, obviously, though, getting that all surveyed and that sort of thing. So those were, I think, the three or four, if you can count Beach House, kind of capital planning items that they'd like to put into the process this year. I think this is actually the first year that they've been asked for that. Usually DPW kind of comes up with it. So I think that, again, that's a good step of progress of actually reaching out to the elected or appointed boards for their input into the process. So that was a big part of it. And again, if you want to watch it, it's probably on YouTube. But I would say that was what was discussed relative to something we'd be interested in.
Thank you. Jay, are you still doing sewer? Were you ever doing sewer?
A while ago I was. I
You're
watch
still-
it every now and then.
Any updates?
Not at the moment, other than their business manager did announce her retirement. They mentioned that the other day on Board of Selectmen.
Got it.
In January. She'll be retiring.
All right, thank you. School department, Mr. Beardmore, since you're on it.
I can't speak on behalf of the school board,
Okay.
so I would defer to you or
Sure.
Mrs. Archambault.
So they had a meeting yesterday, I believe, is that correct? I received an email from Ms. Archambault that just sort of summarized a little bit of what they were doing that really doesn't hold any financial impact whatsoever. Something to do with the school resource officer, but has no fiscal policy effects whatsoever, no financial effects. So nothing really to update there.
So one thing related to schools, someone in town reached out to me. There's a lot of people upset that we're now enforcing the 1.5-mile busing policy, especially when there's some really dangerous situations for kids walking to school within those 1.5 miles. They have to cross Mass Ave, there's not sidewalks, there's a lot of confusion about what 3rd and 4th graders are allowed to do vis-a-vis walking or not. So if they're not allowed to walk, now you're making all those people pick up their children. It's already congested. So perhaps everyone should have known about this maybe in the spring, but now, as they're buying backpacks and getting kids ready for school, it's everyone's kind of woken up to it. So there is financial impacts related to that, so that might be something we want to make sure that, that the budgets that are coming to us are representative of what the town is looking for services. To some extent, it's kind of a basic level of service, I think, for a town, so something we should just be cautious in monitor as we look through budgets this upcoming year.
Carol.
Isn't this all in the school department?
Pardon?
Isn't this all in the school
It
department?
is, yeah.
It is, but I think we take a critical eye and, an eye from the perspective of the taxpayers through our process. So it is fully within the school department and the superintendent's purview for how to do it, but we are the eyes and ears on every budget that comes through us, so.
Ms. Archambault?
Hi, I just wanted to make a comment that next Wednesday night, we will be talking about this issue. We're going to have a Zoom meeting about the busing. And I would also comment that I have received 2 emails from parents, both high school age. I have not received any comments from any 3rd or 4th grade parents regarding this situation. So I hope that they will come to our meeting and tune in, and we can talk to them about the situation and see what we can do to alleviate the problems. And I guess that's all I want to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was, if I remember correctly, it was discussed last year as well during their budget season where the issue was primarily that they could not, it was a number of buses they had to their disposal, and it was contract specific, so they couldn't add more buses.
Related to the bus contract and
Right.
the bidding of the bus contract.
Right,
But the policy has not changed.
right. So yes, absolutely. I'm sure there'll be a large number of people in that meeting.
So the policy has not changed, however, it is being invoked now differently. So, that, to those with students, it is a change. In implementation.
Yep.
Yep. And it does relate to mass law too, I think.
Is this something, did the school committee vote on this? Or is this just a policy that's being, who's actually enforcing this? The school committee or the superintendent?
Well, it's my understanding the superintendent is enforcing it now as a means by which to make the bus contract less costly.
Ms. Archambault, you want to comment?
Thank you. The superintendent is enforcing the policy that the school committee talked about all last fall and voted on in December. It was reinforced with parents in April when they received forms telling them how to sign up for busing, and the new policy was there. It is not the same as Mass law. Mass law says that all students who live outside of 2 miles be bused, but only those students K to 6. Mass law does not require busing of any high school students. We see that differently, obviously. So we are well within Mass law. The discussion was made all through last fall and voted on in December. And then parents were reminded of that information in April. So that's where we're at. The superintendent is not enforcing this on her own fruition. That came from the school committee, basically because we don't have enough buses to bus all the kids. This town has grown. So that's what it comes down to, and we will get into it on Wednesday night.
I have a question for you. Do we bus children from their schools to extended day?
Yes, the kids are brought from the school to extended day.
Okay, so if we did like most towns around us and kept extended day at the schools, we would not have to bus children, thus providing space for those within the 1.5 miles to be bused.
I'm not sure how that would work. I know that the extended day program would become limited in size if it was held at the schools. We've cut back on that program to begin with. It would be cut back even further. So that's something that we would have to talk to the superintendent about how that would work.
There's also not just a single bus that's exclusive to extended day. For
Right.
example, the bus that my kids ride on, they get picked up, and then they go to TCP to pick up the kids they're at before school, and then they go to Turkey Hill, and then they go to the primary school. And the same thing happens in the afternoon as well. Any other questions? What we have, Mr. Archambault?
I just have one alibi on Council on Aging,
Sure.
if we're done with schools.
I think so for now. We can let the school committee have their meeting.
All right, so.
I'm sure they'll have lots to talk about.
Yeah, and just for those of you who didn't catch it watching at home, this will be discussed next Wednesday.
Right.
And we'll see how it shakes out. I had a communication with the town manager this week. There was, as I'm sure you're all aware, the state budget that was just signed by the governor within the last week or so included an earmark for $100,000 for the Eagle House related to the patio project that the town has appropriated $100,000 to. There was a Facebook post this week from the Council on Aging account that was a very benevolent post that basically described, well, now our project is funded by $100,000 from the town and $100,000 from the state. Thank you very much, Senator Cronin and Town Manager Lemieux. And the implication was it was now a $200,000 project. And so I reached out to the town manager, number one, just to see like if we're all still on the same sheet of music, that the plan is the plan and the money is the money. And she articulated to me that there's been no change, that the plans that we were briefed on and were approved at town meeting are the plans, and that we will follow the procedures that we followed in the past, which is using the earmark money first, and then when that is expended, we can use appropriated money for any overruns or that kind of thing, and that which is not expended will roll back into unexpended capital. But it hasn't been discussed publicly, and I just want to mention that the project is still the project, and we're very happy to have state money to help fund that.
Absolutely.
Still our money.
It is our money, yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, and, you know, the
We
great
get a
thing
very
about that
Right
is,
pocket instead of the left.
the great thing about that is that, you know, that unexpended capital would be great for future capital plans, so, you know, it's all good.
Yep. All right, with that, is there any public comment from the board? Hearing none, any public comment from the public? Also hearing none. Items for future meetings. So, at this point, most of the meeting today is going to be a future meeting. We can go back over the bylaw proposal after Peter gets a hold of town council with any luck. The onboarding and orientation program, I'd like to also talk to Tom Baelish about setting up a calendar associated with that as well, to give new members an ideas to kind of how the breakdown works for the year as well. Just a general calendar. I'd like to put on a discussion on fiscal policy explicitly, so we can have sort of our conversation ahead of time in early preparation for a joint meeting with the select board on ideally September 20th. So this would be very early, but this gives us at least some time to start hashing out some ideas, so we have a little bit more to talk about with them, I think, in a month or so. Any other ideas for future meetings at this point?
So, there's a possibility that I will not be able to attend on the 8th of September. So I just want to give you a heads up that depending upon how quickly things transpire with town council and looking at when the warrant closes, I may not be present for a substantive discussion on that. So I'll make sure that you're pre-briefed and
Okay, thank you.
we can go.
Sounds good. Any other ideas? Commerce ideas? Nope. Okay. Upcoming meetings, we have a meeting scheduled for next Thursday as well, August 25th, and then we're back on our normal schedule of September 8th. And then we will go from there as well. With that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Those opposed? We are adjourned at